Hello, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon and this evening's Council Executive. So welcome to all of the public participants that are joining us today, those watching at home, and equally all the committee members and officers that are joining us. We've got quite a packed agenda with lots of items today. So I'm thinking that we will take a comfort break at 7:30 p.m. unless we make particularly swift progress. So just to mention that before we start, so everybody knows, we might be taking a 5-minute break at that point. The first agenda item is declarations of interest. So I'll give any colleagues a couple of seconds to raise their virtual hands or physical hands. I can see Councillor Waller, so I'll come to you first for any declarations of interest. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I am a director of Your Waste and the relevant agenda items are 11 and 13. I won't be participating in those items.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to declare an interest in item 13 as I'm a member of Clifton Without Parish Council, and I will leave the meeting when that item is being discussed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. A non-prejudicial interest in item 8, the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan, as I'm a member of Huntington Parish Council.
Thank you very much for that. I can't see any further indications, so we'll then move on to agenda item 2, which is the exclusion of press and public. And as we can see from the printed agenda, Annex 11 to agenda item 13 is considered private and confidential as it relates to the financial or business affairs of particular persons. My understanding is that we are unlikely to need to discuss something in that annex once we consider the item. So I don't think we will have to remove the press and public, but if I could just get your permission in the event that one of you wanted to ask about Annex 11 to exclude press and public at that point. If I could see a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that. That then takes us on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting, and these are set out on pages 1 to 14. So if again I could see colleagues' support for agreeing the minutes. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting the minutes. That then takes us on to agenda item 4, public participation. And we're fortunate to have a range of public speakers on the different agenda topics tonight. For those public speakers that are with us already, you have 3 minutes to talk to the executive on the topic that you've registered to speak on. And I will give you a 30-second warning today, just so you know in advance. Our first public speaker is Councillor Perrett, who's registered to speak regards plans for the future of the health and care system in York. Councillor Perrett, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to speak today about this plan about the future of the health and care system, because I do have some concerns about the governance arrangements for the proposed alliance. At Health and Wellbeing Board recently, I did request that the presentation that was given to the members of the board was shared with all councillors, as I feel that these changes have huge implications. I wanted all members to be fully briefed about integrated care system changes, and I asked for this to happen ahead of us being expected to vote for the York Health and Care Alliance at full council. Obviously, the clock is ticking on that one. My concerns around the governance, really that it seems to be taking decision-making a little bit further away from people. Membership at the moment, as proposed, doesn't include any representatives for patient voice or those with lived experience, and there will be very little input from elected members to try and represent resident views in absence of those specific members of the board. The terms of reference does mention that patient voice will be allowed through observers, but this is not yet formalised, so I would ask that this is tightened up. The Concord doesn't really set very robust governance arrangements, and the reporting structures aren't yet clear. At the moment, there are 4 elected members on Health and Wellbeing Board and 3 are executive members. I'm the only opposition member who currently sits on it, so I don't think it constitutes true cross-party working, and this alliance seems to remove some more of that input a little bit further away from elected representatives. In terms of assurance and reporting, on page 76, points 4.9 to 4.11, it does cover the reporting schedules, but it is very, very vague. And I think my concern about it is that we're adding another layer of complexity to the system. And obviously the health and care system itself is very, very complex to navigate. And it feels like we're taking accountability and scrutiny a little bit further out of the reach of people. So I would like, if possible, for you to just take these reflections on board and see if we can tighten up how this is going to run and what the governance and accountability structures are going to be for this alliance, because while it's in a shadow role, it will still be taking some really important decisions about health and care in our city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pear, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 7. Our next public speaker today is Councillor Vassy, and he's registered on agenda item 9, the Pollinator Strategy, as chair of the scrutiny committee that considered the strategy. Councillor Vassy, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to recommend the Pollinator Strategy. As you say, the strategy as a draft came to the Climate Change Committee last autumn, and we discussed it with a variety of officers and outside experts. Aside from ensuring the needs of pollinators will be represented in the local plan, there are 2 key areas for the strategy: parks and planted areas in the city, and verges and other wild and open spaces. In our rural road network, grass dominates all our verges, but over 90% of the verge cutting that happens isn't done by the council or its contractors. It's done by members of the public, residents, farmers, and other landowners. People don't cut the verges specifically to make it impossible for wildflowers to thrive. I think they do it because they want to keep nature tidy. But nature doesn't need tidy. The impact is devastating for biodiversity. Verges are often cut before wildflowers are in full bloom or before they set seed, and the result is a monoculture desert of grass. The rotting grass enriches the soil and kills wildflower plants. We need to work with people across the city to educate and inform and ensure that damage ceases. It doesn't only kill bees and pollinators. Huge numbers of other insects, invertebrates, birds and mammals lose their habitats and food sources and die. And we humans too depend on pollinators for our food. This strategy will help turn this around. The report lists some of the new initiatives the council is doing. Last week in my ward, we wildflower sowed 7,000 square metres of verge with the help of Dave Me and the Nature Reserve team at Waldray Kings. We're looking forward to seeing summer flowers. Extending this programme across York will contribute to the National Beeline programme. Within the city too, the strategy brings changes. We'll only use bedding plants that provide forage for pollinators and ban the council use of neonicotinoids in any form. All this is good. One other issue, suction flailing. This isn't a medieval torture machine, but a way of removing arisings generated by mowing. Important because wildflowers need poor soil. This would be a wise investment going forward because the collected arisings from York could feed a biodigester to produce biogas. A suction flailer will pay for itself, and with biogas plants close to the city, it shouldn't be hard to find a buyer for our arisings. We have potential partners. Our internal drainage board manages 264 miles of watercourses around York. They generate a lot of green waste like ours, which could be generating money. I've raised the idea with them and met with a positive response. So in conclusion, I'm happy to support the Pollinator Strategy and to protect our natural world. Let's be busy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vassy, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 9. Our next public speaker today is Councillor Fitzpatrick, who's registered to speak on agenda item 10, the York Outer Ring Road. And Councillor Fitzpatrick, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking today about agenda item 10 on York Outer Ring Road improvements. Although the report refers to this as the Outer Ring Road dualling scheme, this project shouldn't just be about road dualling. It should be a scheme to upgrade the Outer Ring Road transport infrastructure. Dualling is just one part of that. The upgrade work should be for all residents, using all modes of transport, including walking and cycling. but the current plans do not include good enough improvements to the walking and cycling infrastructure. The proposed new pedestrian and cycle segregated path is welcomed, but does not go far enough. Not only is it not fit for the future, it is not even fit for the present. It does not meet the government's current LTN 120 standards. The decision before you today is whether or not to grant council officers permission to carry out the background work needed to be able to make compulsory purchase orders in the future if necessary. But if the designs and planning permission for the upgrade scheme do not include a wider path, then it will not be possible to acquire enough land through CPO to be able to build a wider path now or in the future. Not only will the new path not be wide enough, it will not be future-proofed in order to widen it at a later date. This northern part of the city desperately needs improvements to pedestrian and cycle infrastructure. The city needs a new transport plan, and these improvements to the outer ring road need to be seen as part of building a network, not just a one-off scheme. For example, parts of Wigginton Road that join onto the proposed new path have no pavement currently, nor in these plans. Officers have indicated a possible Wigginton Road multimodal study. When this happens and more people are able to make walking and cycling journeys, the outer ring road path will need to be widened further if it isn't done now. And if the land is acquired now through CPO, then it won't be possible. Some of the council's key priorities are creating a world-class infrastructure, getting around sustainably, creating a greener, cleaner city. If you do not make improvements in the current plans for the outer ring road upgrades and have to rely on compulsory purchase orders, even just as a last resort, then these key priorities will not be met. Please bear this in mind when making your decision this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll take into account your comments when we get to the agenda item. Our next speaker today is Lorna Marchi, who's also registered to speak on agenda item 10, York Outer Ring Road, regarding access to Clifton Gate Business Park. And Lorna, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm the owner of Clifton Gate Business Park, which lies immediately to the north of the A1237 on the Wigginton Road junction. The business park is the home of the award-winning children's play centre Creepy Crawlies, Webb Adventure Park, Little Bugs Nursery, the York Riding School, and numerous other businesses, which are all valuable assets generating employment and revenue for the city. It is not unusual for there to be 8,000 to 10,000 visitors per week, mostly families with children, and although many arrive by car, there are others arriving on foot, by bicycle and by bus. The site has many accesses within 20 metres of the present roundabout, and all of them will be severely impacted. This junction is the most constrained and contentious part of the whole proposal. It will become a subject of this CPO and regrettably produce a delay to a scheme which in principle we all support. The requirement for a CPO rests heavily upon public benefits of the scheme outweighing the rights of those affected. However, this situation is being actively worsened, which calls into question any benefit of the scheme as a whole. There are serious safety concerns, not only for the occupiers, but also to the general public, who are ultimately the sponsors and end users of this scheme. The designers are all fully aware of and concur with all the problems at this junction. Their response has been that the issues are too difficult and too costly to resolve, the available funds having been committed elsewhere. The Wigginton Road junction has the highest footfall and the most vulnerable users, including children and ponies, but is now the only major one not to benefit from any improvement and will be subjected to total severance. Finally, I wish to speak on this issue of CPO, as the requirement to enforce them represents usually a failure in the negotiation process. It's human nature to assume that one's own problems are more important than another's, and there are always those that will resist progress at all costs. However, we are being forced to resist by overwhelming shortfalls in a scheme we actively supported. This is the only chance to rectify a junction which is already compromised by previous poor design and to ensure a sound legacy of safety for the future. In the public interest, we will resist the CPO unless there is a significant redesign on the northbound Withington Road. The re-inclusion of the site entrances must be made within the scheme boundary and in all the safety audits. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution, which we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 10. Thank you very much. Our next public speaker today is Councillor Kilbane, who's registered to speak on agenda item 11, the Joint Waste Management Agreement. And Councillor Kilbane, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. Yeah, I just want to speak briefly on item 11, the Joint Waste Management Agreement, rather than just let it go through on the nod. When this agreement was first made with Nottingham County Council to use the Allerton Waste Recovery Park, which I've always thought is a rather prosaic name for a big incinerator, the operators at the time, back in 2010, they were talking about getting our household waste recycling up to 55% using this facility. The sad reality is, of course, as we all know, that we've struggled to get over 50%, and our council and North Yorkshire have some terrible recycling rates. You could say that they are literally rubbish, and it's a failure really on the part of this council. And in spite of this, you know, we're failing, even though residents want to recycle, as can be seen by the overflowing any supermarket car park. And I do believe that the council wants to recycle as well. I think one of the things that's stopping us from doing so can be seen in this agreement. It's referred to in your report on page 286, line 20, which is that the council retains its obligations regarding tonnage to Allerton Park. So in other words, we need to keep on feeding the beast. And this is the central contradiction of our recycling policy, in the sense that the more that we recycle, the less feed there will be for the beast. And actually, the more accurately we recycle, the less combustibles there will be going in to feed the fire of the belly. So while we're sort of head to terms with this agreement, the details yet to be agreed, I think we need to remove that line or alter it. Otherwise, we will struggle to improve our recycling rates because we have an incentive not to. And I think, you know, that's probably one of the reasons why our waste reduction strategy has been reduced to telling people to take their old clothes to the charity shop and get washable nappies and putting all the onus on them, because systematically we are not committed to recycling and the council can't step up. Though, of course, we haven't helped the situation with the long queues at Hazel Court in recent weeks, making it very difficult for people to recycle. And so long as we stick to this way of thinking, we've got absolutely no hope of a more ambitious zero waste strategy, looking at both the production of waste, not just focusing on how we deal with it. So I know that you're going to agree this. Left. Yeah, thanks, Keith. I'll wrap up now. I know you're going to agree with this tonight. You'll nod it through. As you're doing so, what I strongly recommend you do is look at getting some flexibility with the tonnages so that we can reduce the amount of stuff that's being sent for burning. Let's be honest about renewables. You know, only a cynic would call burning rubbish, renewable energy. And can we have some open data and transparency about the running of the incinerator? Because we're hearing stories of it burning recyclables and actually even injecting diesel, we've heard, to keep it going, because it is just another fossil fuel power station in that case. Okay, thanks all. Have a good evening. Bye now.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane, and your comments will be taken into account when we consider agenda item 11. Our next speaker today is Councillor Fenton, and he's registered to talk on agenda item 12, which is the consultation on additional licensing scheme for houses in multiple occupation, as the chair of the relevant scrutiny committee. Councillor Fenton, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much, Councillor Fenton, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 12. Our next public speaker is Councillor.
Chair, I've got to interrupt, I'm afraid. Hi, Lawrence Barkins, your Council Webcasting Officer. There was a peculiar tech issue with the public speaker just then, where for particular users, they couldn't hear what he was saying. That's me included. So unfortunately, his contribution wasn't recorded for the webcast.
Thank you very much. I could hear, and I know some colleagues could and some colleagues couldn't. So perhaps if you could contact Councillor Fenton and we can add his contribution to the minutes of the meeting, just so those that couldn't hear it can listen and, well, rather read them after the meeting. That would be great.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair.
So our next public speaker, who hopefully everybody will be able to hear, is Councillor Pavlovich, and he too is registered on agenda item 12 in support. So Councillor Pavlovich, hopefully when you come on, everybody will smile and nod that they can hear you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm seeing nods and smiles. Thank you.
Oh, marvellous. I missed Councillor Fenton's contribution as well, so I'm sure it was going to be markedly more interesting than mine, but there we go. Right, I shall make a start. Those of you with good memories will recall I proposed a motion in October 2017 to full council calling for all HMOs to be subject to licensing, which was approved unanimously. 3.5 years later, we are finally seeing that proposal before you for agreement. I hope that 3.5 years doesn't become the norm for a council motion supported by all members to be brought to executive for decision. However, I do recognise that the extension of mandatory licensing of HMOs with 5 or more tenants did require officers to increase their existing workload. It also allowed for an evidence base for a wider implementation to be built up. What the paper you have before you today reinforces is the more anecdotal evidence I presented in 2017, that whilst most landlords do respect their tenants and care for their properties, sadly too many in this city see their properties and their tenants as only a vehicle for a good financial return. Licensing plays an important role in driving up standards, but it must be adequately resourced. I'm sure you've read, and will undoubtedly hear from Ruth, that their evidence suggests that those living in the private rented sector experience the worst living conditions in the city, and with potentially an additional 2,000 properties to be licensed if this recommendation is approved, the staff need to be able to inspect properties is essential. Minimum room sizes, adequate kitchen and bathroom facilities, and electrical and gas safety certificates, and a home where safety is being met are the very minimum that tenants deserve. And where these issues are not being met, we need to ensure that remedial measures are implemented and, when not, enforced. When this came to Housing Scrutiny Committee for pre-decision, we felt that a phased approach would be advantageous, focusing on those areas which have the highest numbers of HMOs. As a councillor with the most HMOs in the city in my ward, this proposal cannot come soon enough, as we regularly hear from tenants and see properties in very poor internal and often external states. To ensure that all landlords of HMOs know their properties are subject to inspection, and where faults are found, re-inspected, will, as you've read, lead to tangible improvements in living standards. I'm sure you'll agree to the officer's recommendations this evening, as I believe you should, and hopefully future motions can be implemented in less than 3 years. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavlovich, and your comments will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 12. Our next public speaker today is Peter Rowlands, who's registered to speak on agenda item 13, Community Asset Transfer Update, to confirm the position of Roughworth with Napton Parish Council. Peter, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully you can hear me.
I can, yes, and I can see some nods as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, I can confirm that we, as a parish council, that's Roughworth with Napton Parish Council, fully support the proposals for the allotments in Roughworth as detailed under item 13 of your agenda. and that at our meeting on the 1st of March, the Council voted unanimously in favour of the arrangements proposed for us to manage the allotments. The benefits of allotments in terms of health, well-being and the environment are well documented and accepted. Moreover, the proximity of the proposed site to the Rougheth-Knapton cycle path and the York Community Woodland fits well with your climate change objectives. The field concerned is ancient ridge and fallow grassland, and we do believe that it is important that the remainder of the field, not required for the allotments, is preserved as such. The new allotment design is excellent and will provide a tremendous asset to the village and be a significant improvement on the old site that it replaces. However, it has taken a frustratingly and frankly unacceptable length of time to get to this stage. The previous landlord gave notice in December 2017, and the allotment holders had to quit the site in December 2018. This means that as we speak, they will have been without their allotments for 3 growing seasons. But we are where we are. What is imperative is that this project proceeds urgently and that the site is ready to hand over by the 1st of January 2022 to avoid a further season being missed. To my reckoning, this requires site works to start by at least late summer, and planning approval has to be gained before then. So this does not leave much time. I notice there is mention of a further report coming forward, but I trust that this will not cause further delays, and I urge you to not only approve the proposals before you tonight, but to give officers the authority to move this project forward immediately to ensure that the deadline of the 1st of January 2022 is met. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, and we'll consider your contribution when we reach agenda item 13. Our next public speaker today is Kath Mortimer, who's registered to speak also on agenda item 13, and this is in support of a lease of the upper floors to the Friends of Roundtree Park. And Kath, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I'm speaking on support of this idea of having the flat being used by the Friends. So Roundtree Park has provided somewhere green and peaceful for local people and visitors to relax and play for 100 years now since it was given to the people of York. And the Friends were formed in the 1980s to look after the interests of the park and its users. And at this time, the council's teams did all of the practical work in the park, and the Friends, as a small voluntary group, were consulted by the council, but mainly did fun activities, which we described as the icing on the cake. These included starting a young Friends group and working on art and history projects. With the deep cuts to council funding in the last 5 years, the Friends have stepped up, and our volunteers now take care of gardening in select areas. We also still run a huge range of very varied community events. We became a charity 2 years ago, and our membership has expanded to over 700 households. We've got more than 80 volunteers, and they contribute well over 4,000 volunteer hours per year. And all this activity is run from our homes, as the Friends do not have a physical base in a park. The original gift by Roundtree envisaged all of the park as being of benefit to the community, including the buildings, but the park keeper's flat has now been vacant for more than 3 years. So our proposal, based on the results of a major consultation, is for this space to be a base for the Friends, but also an affordable community space hireable by local groups and individuals for meetings, etc. It's not intending to make us a lot of money, but to cover costs, including a sinking fund and making a small operating surplus. Any additional profit would go back into the work of the Friends in the park. And we provided the council officers with a business plan based on a community asset transfer at a peppercorn rate. So the plans do include a lift from the cafe floor to the 2 upper floors to allow disabled access. And we think we found a location which won't impact the cafe operation too much. Our design will keep the cafe secure even if the lift is in use when the cafe is closed. And the Friends already have a very close relationship with the Reading Cafe staff. And we believe that bringing the rooms above the cafe into community use will benefit the cafe, bringing in extra customers and in effect providing extra customer accommodation. We think there's a lot of potential for other ways of working together for mutual benefit, and we'd also like to work with the tennis club. We realise the project will be a massive undertaking for us, but we believe that we can do it. The project will need a team of volunteers, and in particular, it will require substantial fundraising, largely through grant applications, and we're in the process of putting together this team. And the project will also need the Council's previously planned investment to tackle the known electrical and asbestos issues in the building. So we believe this project will benefit the whole community, as well as allowing the Friends to continue to support the well-being of the park and its users. And it's particularly apt that these plans are coming together in the park's centenary year, so we'd like to recommend it to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that will be taken into account when we consider agenda item 13. Our next public speaker today is Robert Gordon, and he's here to speak on agenda item 9, the Pollinator Strategy. And just to explain to those watching that normally the order of public speakers follows the order of the agenda items, but there was a request to speak later and also some connectivity issues, which explains the slight jumping about. But Robert, you have 3 minutes to talk to us about the Pollinator Strategy.
Yes, thank you, Keith. Sorry, I was at the vets, but I'm back now. My name is Robert Gordon, and I am a campaigner for the York Green Party. And as you said, I'm speaking on item 9, the Pollinator Strategy. I'm incredibly happy to see that the Pollinator Strategy and Action Plan is progressing following the Green Party motion in 2019. By preserving and creating pollinator-friendly areas and habitats, we simultaneously create a more beautiful atmosphere within our city for local residents and visitors, and create desperately needed habitat and food for our pollinators, who of course are necessary for maintaining our own food supplies. Within the strategy, there are a lot of positives to be celebrated. The new community woodland to include a wildflower meadow, for example, the phasing out of neonics by the end of 2021, and the trialling of alternatives to glyphosates in weed control. On top of this, there is a commitment to measure the abundance of pollinator-friendly habitat on council land. With this, I hope that the council will use the figure they come to set ambitious benchmarks for increasing the amount of pollinator-friendly land. Of course, alongside habitat and biodiversity loss, one of the biggest threats to our pollinators is climate change. This is why, alongside this strategy, I am pleased to see the council maintaining the ambition for York to be carbon zero by 2030, with concrete actions to achieve this target. Without pollinators, our ecosystems that sustain life will break down further. It is therefore very disappointing that the strategy doesn't commit resources to the necessary citywide projects that will ensure that we not only achieve a sustainable future, but a livable one. Relying instead on disjointed ward-level actions fails on our commitment to ensure a healthy environment for future generations. I hope that the council will continue to recognise and account for the plight of pollinators in planning decisions and as they deliver on key projects, including York Central, Castle Gateway, and the dualling of the Ring Road. On a related note, I would like to welcome the allocation of £80,000 for the provision of allotments in Rougheth. In light of the Pollinator Strategy, I think this provides the perfect opportunity for the council to work with local residents to emphasise the dangers of pesticides and insecticides and promote more planet and pollinator-friendly practices in local growing. Perhaps the allotment at Rougheth could aspire to become York's first all-organic allotment, banning the use of practices that harm our pollinators. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your comments will be taken into account when we consider agenda item 9. Our final public speaker today is Hughie Ferguson, who's here to talk on agenda item 10, York Outer Ring Road. And Hughie, you have 3 minutes. I know we had some connectivity problems earlier, so I'll just ask Lawrence or Richard.
Yes, I think Mr. Ferguson, if you could press *6 on your dial pad, that will unmute you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I just
Hello.
want to speak on agenda item 10, which is the dualling of the Outer Ring Road. I'm particularly concerned about safety measures or the lack of them in and around Wigginton Road itself, the current plans seem to have been changed from what I originally saw, and I'm very concerned over the safety measures that or the lack of them. The current situation on the Outer Ring Road, yes, it needs dualling. However, the cars already go 60 mile an hour. You've got, on the south side, you've got the cycle path and you've got the pedestrian cycle path, pedestrian walkway, sorry. At 60 mile an hour, there's no protection for any pedestrians or cyclists there. It only takes a jackknifed lorry, it only takes a car to lose control, and we could see a nasty accident. We need to have some sort of crossing from at the Wigginton Road roundabout, and I just hope that we can go further and go a proper full pedestrian cycleway down to Wigginton from the Wigginton Road roundabout. It needs to happen. We need to have a safety crossing to allow people to cross the road from getting the buses when they're getting off at the nursery, when they're walking to Creepy Crawley's Adventure Park. I just think we need to see that. Thank you very much for your time. I've got real bad connectivity, but thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we'll take them into account when we consider agenda item 10. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of our public speakers for participating today. And that now takes us on to agenda item 5, which is the forward plan between pages 15 and 18. Just give any councillors an opportunity to raise any issues. If not, could I please see those in favour of accepting the forward plan? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting that. There has been a request that I change the order of the agenda, and I should have mentioned that at the very start of the meeting, so apologies for that. But the request is that agenda item 7, plans for the future in health and social care, are brought up one agenda item, and that's to allow some partners to join us to explain the proposals. So if I move on to agenda item 7 first, please, and invite Sharon, Simon and Mike, if they've been able to join us, to turn on their cameras and come onto the screen. Sharon, I know you're going to introduce the report first, so if I could hand over to you, and perhaps you could bring in others after your opening comments.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to present to Executive a set of proposals which have been developed by health and care partners locally.
I have lost Sharon. Just again to check in with Richard or Lawrence.
Example of the positive benefits of this partnership approach. As officers working across health and care, we strongly believe that a health and care alliance is the right way forward for York. It will allow us to continue working together to build on our successes over the last year, and it will allow us to plan and deliver local health and care services that meet the needs of our residents, improve health and well-being outcomes, and reduce the variation in health outcomes across York. It will also allow us to have a strong focus on York as a place within the Humber Coast and Vale integrated care system. The report asks the Executive to consider these proposals, agree the Council participation in the Alliance, and to agree that the Alliance be established as a subgroup of the Health and Wellbeing Board in its first shadow year, 2001 to 22, subject to approval by the Council. Before I bring in my colleagues, I would just like to respond to the comments made by Councillor Perrott as a public speaker earlier in the meeting, expressing concerns around the governance arrangements for the board. Paragraph 18 in the report, that's page 64 in your reports pack, sets out the governance arrangements for the Alliance. And it makes it clear that in its shadow year, the Alliance will not be making decisions. It's not intended to be established as a decision-making body. So members of the Alliance will refer back to their existing governance and decision-making arrangements. And so for the Council, it will remain the responsibility of the executive to exercise all its usual governance functions. And so the Alliance doesn't take decision making away from elected members. Elected members will continue to have those responsibilities. What the report also highlights is that during the shadow year, there will be further work done to look at those governance arrangements post-April 2022, and there'll be further reports to the executive and to full council to outline those future proposals. So at that point, I will stop, but invite Dr. Mike Holmes and Simon Morritt as our NHS partners to say something about why they believe that a Health and Care Alliance is the right way forward for York.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you, Simon and Mike, for joining us in your time. Mike, if I could come to you first. I can't hear you. I can. So what I'll do is that? Oh, that's it. Excellent.
Great. Okay. So thank you, Keith. Thank you, Sharon. I mean, I think if the question is why is this a good idea now, I think the time is right. The political environment is right. We're seeing the introduction of a white paper, which you'll have all seen published recently, and that will be followed by legislation prior to April 2022. And what that means is the integrated care system will come into fruition, and there'll be a real focus on place. And that place, as far as this proposal is concerned, is the City of York. And what we've seen, certainly from my perspective in general practice over the last year, we've seen all the general practices come together and get ready to collaborate with the rest of the system. And I hope you've seen the potential of that in the mass vaccination service. You know, that is a real embodiment of collaboration across the city. Yourselves as a local authority have been involved, been working with the hospital, and local businesses and other stakeholders in health and social care. And I think what we feel is a shared objective and shared delivery of what is proving to be a very good service to protect the population. So I think we've demonstrated how we can collaborate. The partners in the Health and Care Alliance have been speaking with each other and meeting for the last 6 months, getting ready to launch into our shadow year from the end of this month. And we just feel like the environment is right for this collaboration, and I think it'll be a really positive thing for the population of York. It's going to have a focus on population health management, on sharing data, so we can co-design and co-deliver services for the benefit of our population. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, and to Simon.
Thank you, and hello everybody. I mean, it's very difficult to add anything much to what Sharon and Mike have said already. Really, I think what is really important with the introduction of the white paper and integrated care systems is that we have an effective vehicle in the City of York for us to continue the conversations that we have around how we collectively deliver services across the city between ourselves. And I think in the absence of this alliance, it's difficult to see where we would find that space to collectively plan and deliver services for the citizens of York going forwards. So to some extent, there's a necessity to introduce an arrangement like this, but there's also a great deal of opportunity. Sharon is right. It will not be a decision-making body, and it will not have, certainly in the first year, resource delegated to it from the wider ICS from an NHS perspective. But if we can demonstrate that we can make changes, we can improve services, we can think about how we can develop the work that we do across this city, then there is an opportunity for us to develop our thinking further in future years. So we certainly support it within the hospital. I know our colleagues in Tees Esquire, Bally's NHS Trust, who deliver mental health services across the City of York, are also very supportive of it. And I think the opportunities that it offers us are very exciting in future years. So, we have nothing to be afraid of, but everything to look forward to.
Thank you very much for that to Mike and Simon for joining us. And I can also see that Amanda and Peter have joined us in case we have any questions when we now move on to considering the report. So I'll open it for any comments and questions. I think I'd start by really highlighting the timing of the process. Many will ask why it's happening now and when we're still responding to the pandemic, and that answer is given in points 6, 9 and 10 of the paper, and was obviously mentioned by Sharon and Simon, and how it's linked to the government's recently published white paper, which sets out the series of reforms to health and social care. So whilst it's not ideal timing, we want to take a look at the opportunities presented and we'll work to that time frame. And I think what is really clear is that there's a real opportunity to lock in some of the positive working that we've seen throughout the last 12 months. And I'm sure all colleagues in this meeting and others will agree that throughout the pandemic, we've seen staff in health and social care come together under really incredibly challenging circumstances. And it's hoped that the establishment of the Alliance really begins to formalise that work and builds a system where everyone can work easily together, really focusing on York. And the intention is that through working together more closely, decisions will then be better coordinated with a much better understanding for the implications for York and its residents and our different communities. And as has been mentioned earlier, to get that work underway, it's proposed that a shadow board is established and helps to agree terms of reference, which will be published well in advance of April 22. And in shadow form, as has been mentioned, the Alliance will not make decisions and members will report back to their own organisation. So for the Council, to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and the Council and partners will then be able to review the Alliance and how it's worked over the 12 months, with further public reports presented to the Health Scrutiny Committee and to the wider council. And I'm sure Councillor Runciman will respond in a bit. I'm certainly very happy to get the Health and Wellbeing Board briefing sent to all members, if not a members briefing session arranged, so that councillors can engage with that process. And I would also like to highlight, as Simon mentioned, that at this point, that additional investment is not required. Residents will still be able to access healthcare in the same ways they always have, but ultimately we hope by establishing a York Health and Care Alliance that we can improve how healthcare is delivered in the city and address the health issues that will make the biggest difference to residents' lives. And I'm certainly happy to recommend that we support the 7 recommendations outlined in the report. With that, Councillor Runciman.
Thank you. I welcome this report on the York Health and Care Alliance, and I'd like to thank all those that have worked on it. This is an important step forward for the city and part of the strong joint leadership which NHS, the city and county council partners have put in place around health and social care. This has been a vital part of the response to COVID-19 over the past 12 months. During the pandemic, we've seen the power and impact of collaboration, sharing expertise and data and services across the city has helped with the success of our vaccination programme. And this is the opportunity to build on this excellent work and develop healthcare in York around our residents, tailoring services in the city to local priorities. Through the establishment of the Alliance, we can formalise this work and build a system where we can more easily work together to focus on the city's priorities, as already set out by the Health and Wellbeing Board. And there will certainly be more work during this coming year on governance and accountability. Through working together more closely, decisions can be coordinated with a good understanding of the wider implications for York and its residents. The Alliance discussions will aim to reach consensus across all partners over what action is best for York. Residents will still be able to access healthcare in the same ways they always have. But when the new Alliance comes, it will further improve services residents receive and health outcomes across the city. As health and care partners, we've chosen to come together to support each other in taking collective action to help make the City of York an even fairer and even healthier place to live in. Our joint work has been underpinned by a shared belief that we are more successful in bringing about change and improving the lives of our residents if we work together. The plans in the report look to embed that and build on what we've worked in the last year. I welcome the report and I'm pleased to support the recommendations set out in it.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Runciman. So on that, we have the recommendations, as we both mentioned, the 7 recommendations at the front of the report. Could I please see all those in favour of accepting those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. And just to thank Simon and Mike for joining us for that item. Thanks very much. So that now moves us on to what would have been the first item, agenda item 6, which is the Council Recovery and Renewal Strategy and the March update. And I'm going to invite Will to introduce this report to us, please. Will.
Thank you very much. The report focuses on the government's roadmap for recovery and makes points of how the council will respond to support the safe reopening of the city centre. Although the direction of travel in terms of infection within the city is being good, there's still further work to go clearly to reduce the risk for residents. And so in order to do so, the annexes 1 to 3 contain the necessary steps and recommendations to balance the needs of that recovery and that reopening of the city with the needs to support the safety of residents and visitors. The report also recognises that despite the de-restrictions and the road to recovery, we'll be living with COVID for some time to come. And we must acknowledge that the social impacts and the need to address inequalities is significant across the city. Related to that, Annex 4 also highlights the elements of community response that we've undertaken over the course of the last year and the approach that will be taken for the future to ensure that communities are supported. There are a number of recommendations in the report relating to those annexes, and those are you can see on the front of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Will. And I'll now open the item for any comments or questions. I think I'd just reflect that this is the first meeting of the executive since the government's roadmap out of lockdown was published on the 22nd of February. And as people will see from the content of the report that Will has just outlined and all of the attached annexes, a lot of work is currently taking place to respond to the roadmap and to ensure that York can reopen safely when those restrictions are eased. Of course, the first milestone has already been reached with pupils and students returning to school and college. And I know others will join me in thanking school staff and teachers for their outstanding work during this difficult period, particularly in supporting vulnerable young people and the children of key workers. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the very many parents across York who have homeschooled in the most trying of circumstances. Looking forward, it's proposed that the council will not be investing additional resources to attract visitors to the city in the short term. Given how this could impact on our rates of infection, this will of course be continually assessed as the milestones are reached. But instead, the council will build on the work from last summer to best use our public spaces to provide businesses the opportunity to trade safely and in compliance with social distancing. And as you can see from Annex 1, a total of 288,000 has been proposed to support businesses when restrictions ease through the management of public spaces and creating safe conditions for businesses to trade once again. I'm really pleased that this further work will be carried out, including progressing Purple Flag for the city centre and to coordinate activities through the Safety Advisory Group. Before I finish, I'd just like to underline how important it is to not be complacent. As outlined in point 9 of the report, whilst the rate of infection has been on a downward trend, the city's numbers are still significantly higher when compared to the lowest points of last summer. And so that goes for all of us to continue to follow the public health guidance as the restrictions ease. And I'm very happy to support the recommendations as outlined under point 4. And on that, Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. And as you've commented on, the Council is making preparations based on the government's roadmap for reopening, accepting that some of those dates are earliest dates and may be put back based on data. But we need to support the recovery of businesses and communities whilst recognising that many people have been working in essential businesses during lockdown, making sure that we're kept supplied, and we are grateful for that. As a popular destination, which York is, we recognise that people will come as soon as the government lift the travel ban, and therefore we need to put in place mechanisms so that this happens as safely as it can be. Achieving the right balance to support individual safety whilst facilitating increased business and social activity is central to our planning efforts, and public health guidance will be paramount in all the decisions that we make. To support the economic recovery of the city, the Council has built on the lessons of the challenges of coronavirus, and we will be promoting a system that draws on the strengths of the city and the region. Learning from the reopening activities that took place during the summer 2020, when the city saw many visitors and, as the leader mentioned, much lower cases of coronavirus, we need to factor into that the experiences from December and the impact of variants of COVID, which spread more readily. Reopening in 2021 is taking place in a different environment, where testing and mass vaccination is more the norm. There isn't a tier system, thankfully, but there are variants and therefore numbers can go up. So we've got to be vigilant. Recognising that once the visitors start coming, we need to utilise extra open space for dining areas and encouraging outdoor activity. So that people can explore our city safely, and that the many local businesses which need our help are able to engender customers safely. And I'd like to pay tribute to the officers who have worked both last summer throughout the period and in preparation for this summer with all of our partners to really bring on board a collaborative approach. The Be York campaign has been a successful way of getting that message through. Annex 1 to the report sets out some of the initial plans that are being put in place. The installation of temporary loos and other facilities in the city centre are essential, and also I welcome the extension of the COVID support marshals programme until the end of June, as these have been a welcome and appropriate response to remind people about the actions that they need to take to maintain low levels of COVID. And there are applications for temporary managed outdoor spaces to recognise that not every business has the space in front of their shop or premises to expand. Annex 3 describes the proposal to trial a behavioural insight approach. This would support the safest use of the city centre, taking an evidence-based approach. As a trained scientist, I'm always keen on utilisation of experience and evidence to mitigate the risk of increased community transmission as a result of increased visitors. And this would involve taking a citywide approach and learning from the experiences of business owners, observing behaviour and asking visitors and residents about what they have experienced in the city centre and understand how COVID-safe behaviours can be best prompted amongst visitors and local employees in spaces in the city centre, also recognising the neighbourhood shopping areas and other public spaces where this might happen. Safety, of course, is our first priority, and we're working closely with businesses across the city to ensure that rigorous safety measures are in place and that residents are aware and practicing social distancing and other public health measures. While some residents will embrace the relaxations, there will be others who will see the need to continue for longer the practices that we've adopted to limit transmission, and therefore I do want to have a city centre and neighbourhood shopping centres that people feel comfortable in. We're continuing to support local businesses as they develop their plans to reopen, working with partners to ensure that the city is safe for local residents as restrictions are being eased. We will work with local communities, business leaders across the city, and work with public health colleagues to ensure that York is best placed to respond to the lifting of restrictions whilst keeping people in the city safe. With some restrictions expected to stay in place for a considerable time, we hope the government guidance is clear. Thankfully, no reference this time to substantial meals in pubs, so that will hamper the Scotch egg sales, but at least it gives greater clarity. But we're recognising the local public health efforts and recognising the work of Sharon and her team to ensure that that there is active support amongst a whole range of teams that give guidance to businesses. I urge the executive to agree the reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wallach. Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to start, I guess, by thanking Will and his team for all the work that goes into these papers. That, you know, they don't just appear out of nowhere, and it is a lot of work collating what the local authority is getting up to in its response to COVID-19. So, and it is a lot of it goes unsung. So thank you, Will. And I won't be asking any questions, just commenting on the papers today. This year has been incredibly challenging in ways that none of us could have foreseen just 12 months ago, and the pandemic has had a significant effect on communities right across the city, including on poverty, inequality, mental health concerns and isolation. Not only is there a moral imperative to build back better and fairer, but there's also a practical need to address and minimise the negative impacts of inequality, which would otherwise restrict the recovery of our city. The Council has been working with partners across the region and the city to consider how best to support this recovery whilst we continue to live with COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. Over the course of the pandemic, the Council has continued to support communities, particularly those requiring additional support as a result of the restrictions. Annex 4 in particular sets out the approach that this has been taken, as well as the immediate plans for continuing this support. And I'll challenge anyone to find a COVID-19 helpline from a council that's lasted as long as York's has. So, yeah, particularly thanks to the team that are behind that support, and in particular those who set it up right from the beginning. Our intention will be to resume the rollout of the physical community hubs. It is clear that there will continue to be issues for individuals and communities caused by isolation, financial and other pressures associated with the pandemic, and that these are exacerbated by the disruption to normal community support mechanisms. To address these needs in a transitional approach, a transitional approach will need to be taken to support individuals and communities, moving away from the sort of crisis support that we've been in for 12 months now and seeking instead to build more resilient support networks. Whilst I'm not going to spend a great deal of time going into the plans within Annex 4, I would like to take the time again to thank the thousands of volunteers that stepped up to support their neighbours and the most vulnerable throughout the city. Their selfless work has been a crucial and critical part of the city's response to the pandemic, and it's something that as a city we can really be very proud of. As we look to build back better, We are committed to building on the successes of community hubs and the other community-based schemes to strengthen and empower York's thriving communities. Thank you ever so much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to the comments that you made in relation to all children returning to school, it's worth noting that all our schools were fully open on March the 8th. This was not the case everywhere, with some areas having a staged return to school over that first week. To facilitate this return on March the 8th, just under 15,000 tests were carried out for school pupils in York in the first week of March, in preparation for the pupils returning to school. And following the return, attendance in our schools has been very high, with 97% of pupils attending at one point compared to 76% nationally. And I would support your thank you to everyone involved in schools, together with our education and health teams, who've ensured the systems were in place to allow pupils to access the tests they needed. And of course, appreciation for the support of parents and young people. It was the work of all involved that made the return to school such a success. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Orrell. Councillor Mize.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a quick question, really. It's likely for Debbie Mitchell. It's on page 27, paragraph 35. It talks about the proposal to defer the restoration, the increase in the cremations fee. I just wondered if you had any more information about how long that deferral will be in place for, and confirmation really that reduced fee that's still being charged is where that figure came from. I understand that figure's even lower than April 2019. So just some rationale behind that, please.
Thank you very much. Debbie.
Yeah, so the proposal regarding the crem fees is well, as it's set out in the report, that was the logic behind that was to include the rate of inflation but maintain that same level of discount at £175. So it was a £175 discount on the previous year's charge, and then a £175 discount on the proposed charge for this financial year. In terms of how long, well, the again, as it's outlined in the report, it's proposed to defer until we can fully have as many people as want to be at those services in the future. So again, it says in the report initially until the end of June, and then depending on progress with the roadmap, it will be reviewed again at that point.
Thank you very much. I can see that Councillor Eyre has indicated as well. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just to provide some clarity that the rationale behind that was the fact that we weren't able to offer the full funeral service, hence why we offered the discounted fee. And the intention is that that discount will remain until such time as we're able to offer the full service we were able to prior to the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much for that. So with that, we've got the recommendation to accept this report in front of us. Could I please see all those in favour? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting this report. Thank you, Will. So we'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is Huntington Neighbourhood Plan Examiner's Report. That's set out between pages 93 and 252 of your report. And I can see that Alison has joined us. I don't know if is Mike with us as well. He might just be on a different screen and has not popped up. Neil is here. You're talking, Neil, but you're muted. At least
Mike's not available this evening, so I'll be joining Nikki.
Right, thank you very much. Neil, do you want to introduce the report first, and then we'll hand over to Alison?
Yeah, like I say, this is the neighbourhood plan for Huntington that's been before you and delayed due to the COVID pandemic. And Alison will talk you through the process that we've undertaken in the last year and the next steps in that journey.
Alison. I can't hear you at the moment. I think this is just the meeting where we've got some gremlins in the system.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
I will be passing over to my colleague Anna, who'll give you a bit more detail, but just to say that this report was also taken to Local Plan Working Group in October, and again to Local Plan Working Group this week to discuss the decision taking forward in terms of members today to move forward a referendum. So if I could hand over to Anna to give you a bit more detail on the report. Thank you.
Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report relates to the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan. It's concluded its examination with the receipt of the examiner's report, which is at Annex A. And we also held further consultation regarding Greenbelt policies, which you can see more detail at Annex B. As Alison said, this was discussed in more detail at the Local Plan Working Group on Tuesday. Firstly, though, I would like to say how we appreciate the amount of hard work that the Huntington Parish Council's put into the process. It really has made it a locally representative plan. In terms of the examiner's report, we received that in February of last year, and the examiner recommended that the council that subject to the recommendations and modifications he set out in his report, that the neighbourhood plan should proceed to referendum. The examiner's report did suggest several modifications. These are set out at Annex D in the decision statement. The majority of the examiner's recommendations were minor in nature, but he did recommend some changes which are set out at paragraphs 18 to 27 of the executive report. These predominantly relate to national policy and also consistency with the local plan. Officers are content with all of the recommendations. Members may be aware that we did bring a report last October to executive outlining the officer modifications relating to the High Court judgment, which was the Wedgwood against City of York Council High Court case, which clarified how to make decisions in relation to land falling within the Greenbelt for development control purposes in advance of the local plan. Annex B and Annex D to the report set out the proposed additional recommended modifications, and the consultation comments were predominantly supportive, and officers recommend to continue to recommend these changes. In terms of the decision statement, the legislation requires that the council consider each of the recommendations made by the examiner and also by the additional recommendations on the Greenbelt and decide what action to take. We recommend that all of the examiner's modifications and the additional officer modifications are made to the report. The officer recommendation is that subject to these modifications to the plan, it meets the basic conditions and is also compatible with the Convention Rights for Human Rights. If the local authority is satisfied that the plan meets the basic conditions and complies with the definition of a neighbourhood plan, if it's modified, then the referendum must be held. The council must publish its decision in the decision statement and hold a referendum within 56 days. If executive agree tonight to the proposed amendments, then the decisions in the decision statement, then the neighbourhood plan will hold significant weight in relation to planning applications. In relation to next steps, assuming that executive endorse the recommendations in the report tonight, it's anticipated the referendum will be held on or before the 10th of June of this year. A date is currently being discussed with electoral services. A question was raised at the local plan working group on Tuesday night by Councillor Hollier. He asked whether the Huntington neighbourhood referendum could take place at the same time as the Police and Crime Commissioner election on the 6th of May, or whether the postal votes could be combined with that election. I did speak to the council's relevant legal officer, and I've been informed that we cannot, in fact, combine the postal votes for the Neighbourhood Plan referendum and the Police and Crime Commissioner election, because the data deadline has now passed for that. In terms of the final stages of the Neighbourhood Plan process, the regulations state within 8 weeks following the referendum, the plan must be made. So that is also an executive function. So the report will be brought back to Local Plan Working Group and then executive again in July. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the introductions there, and I'll first hand to Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. This has been working through the system, and I'd like to thank officers and the volunteers who managed to keep this going through a very difficult period, to have such positive comments from an inspector remarking on the engagement with the community whilst there's a pandemic pays tribute to all of the efforts that have gone in, and so I'd like to thank everyone for that, and welcome the very local view of that area for a plan that covers their community. I think it's been a strong example around the piece, and it's something that I hope that all parts of the city get.
Thank you very much. Councillor Orwell.
Thank you, Chair. Anna answered the question I was going to ask as to the weight that can be given to the neighbourhood plan, and she said it was significant, which is very encouraging. I'd also like to add to the thanks of Councillor Waller and yourself for the small group of people who carried out this plan. I was talking to the chair of the committee the other day, and he said he'd been working on it for 6 years. So it's a long commitment for a small group of people to carry out the plan. And I think on behalf of my colleagues in Huntington and New Years, we welcome this plan and the significance it has for our area and the protection that it gives to many of the facilities in our area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So we have the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 8. So if I could see colleagues that would like to accept those. Thank you very much. So clear majority in favour of accepting the recommendations for agenda item 8. Thank you very much. So that now takes us on to agenda item 9, which is the Pollinator Strategy from page 253. And I believe that James has joined us to present this one. James.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll know, in August last year, Exec received a draft Pollinator Strategy, and that was in response to the council motion. In August last year, you referred this to the Climate Change Committee. The proposed strategy before you tonight therefore reflects the input from members of the Council's Climate Change Committee. The strategy is in 2 parts. Part 1 provides context and examples of what can be achieved and links to best practice, and Part 2 sets out the aims and objectives to implement the strategy. The actions range from high-level strategy and relate to planning processes through to changes in purchasing policy. Some can be adopted now, others require further work and/or additional resources, and others are challenging. For instance, where some people would like changes in land use and the tensions between those who want land for sport or those who want to picnic, etc., and those who want it for pollinators. So the proposal is therefore this strategy, sets the vision, but much of the implementation that needs management at a local level is expected to be bottom up, with wards leading on the changes for projects or changes to management regimes. The recommendation is that you approve the Pollinator Strategy before you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll first go to Councillor Widdowson.
Thank you. I would like to briefly speak on how important the report just outlined is for our city and the ongoing efforts to make York cleaner and greener. There are over 4,000 species of insects in the UK even, that carry out pollination of our native wild plants and food crops. Insects like bumblebees, butterflies and beetles all provide a vital part in pollination of our native wild plants and of our food crops. ensuring the protection of our city's biodiversity. But they're under threat and in decline due to habitat loss and excessive pesticide use. As set out in this report, across Europe, 38% of the bee and hoverfly species are in decline, and over 3 million hectares of these habitats have been lost in England since the 1930s. We know we can all do more, and we want to work with residents and businesses to make York a more pollinator-friendly city. This is why we're taking action now to protect these species, which are vital for many of the things we need, including pollinating our native wild plants and our food crops. We're already doing some fantastic work across the city, from creating a community woodland with 50,000 trees to planting wildflowers on grass verges. We're changing the way we work at the council too, and are trialling new methods of weed control without the use of chemicals. The new strategy aims to protect, increase and enhance the amount of pollinator habitats on council-owned land or managed land, and help to improve the status of any locally threatened species. These are small yet crucial steps to ensure that our overall strategy takes a comprehensive approach to supporting the biodiversity and sustainable future of our city. And so I welcome this report.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Craighill.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've just got a very brief comment and then a question for James. Just my comment is just really to say I am very pleased this paper has come forward to us today. As Councillor Widdowson referred to, I think more and more people are becoming very aware of the crisis facing our pollinators, such as bees and other insects, in the face of overuse of chemicals and pesticides and intensive farming, and the threat that, as you said, this does actually represent to our future food supplies is very serious. So I think it's great that we've got a range of measures set out here that can help to turn that round by providing much needed habitat in the city. So my question is just to ask if you could explain a bit more about our approach to our own council grass cutting regimes. It's often understood that reducing the frequency of cuts and removing arisings, as I think Councillor Vassie referred to when he spoke at the beginning, that these are a key way of increasing wildflower areas on verges and in other areas of public space. And I think people's perception is also that this could save the council money. So I'm just not quite clear from the paper how we're going to address this. So if you could just say a little bit more about that, that would be great, please.
So apologies if I wasn't clear. I think what I was alluding to is that the strategy sets that high level, but rather than a top-down approach where we say this is how this bit of land will be managed across the city, what we'll do is work with wards on specific projects. And there are some examples, and indeed Councillor Vassie talked about one, where we will approach it on a ward-by-ward basis, looking at those projects that we can deliver with wards to make the change that we need to do. So that's the approach, is that we'll be on a ward-by-ward basis rather than a top-down approach, and we'll work with wards on those projects.
Okay, thank you. I know there's a great deal in the strategy, so I'm sure we can build on that as we go forwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So we have the recommendations in front of us for agenda item 9. Could I see those in favour of accepting them? Thank you very much. So a clear majority in favour of accepting that. So thank you for that. And it now takes us on to agenda item 10, which is the York Outer Ring Road Phase 1 dualling report. Starts at page 267 in your pack. And I'm going to hand back to James to introduce this.
Thank you very much, Chair. So you may remember in June last year, the executive made the exciting decision to progress the dualling and the junction upgrades to the Outer Ring Road as a single project. You have actually made decisions about compulsory purchase orders in the past, but this didn't relate to the new combined scheme. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Gary to talk you through the detail in the report in terms of the CPO, but also address some of those concerns that were raised by speakers in the process of how we'll deal with those. So if I could hand over to Gary.
Thank you, James. Good evening, councillors. Can you all hear me? Great.
So the main purpose of this report is to seek a resolution for an in-principle approval to draft a compulsory purchase order for the land required to build the scheme. I'll return to that with more detail in a few moments, but firstly would like to just set out a little bit of background to the report. As James said, if you cast your minds back to June last year, the approval was given to proceed with the procurement of the supply chain and develop the scheme, and also to conduct a consultation process. Both of those areas of work have now been completed. However, there are some things still to do in order to respond and publish a report about the outcomes of the consultation. As the report states, we have had over 3,500 responses to the consultation process, and from that, 79% of responders either supported or strongly supported the proposals. In terms of people's concerns, the strongest theme was about inadequate facilities for pedestrians and cyclists. So the plan from now, which partially answers the participants' questions, is to complete working through those comments and bring a separate report back to the executive in 2 or 3 months, explaining how we've dealt with those concerns. Having got to that position, the key goals for 2021 are to submit a planning application, to develop the detailed design and business case, and to acquire as much of the required land as possible by private treaty. And that leads me back to the main purpose of this report. Executive are being asked to approve the principle of pursuing a compulsory purchase order and side roads order using the powers vested in City of York Council as Highway Authority in order to acquire the land required for the scheme. 2 things to note at this stage. A compulsory purchase order, or CPO. A CPO is a last resort. We hope to reach agreement with landowners privately, but we need to start the legal process now to make sure a CPO is ready in case it's needed. Secondly, we will continue to attempt to acquire land by private agreement from this point on, up to a public inquiry. And we'll approach landowners and offer terms on that basis. The other underlying reason that we need to take into consideration is with this resolution is to meet the needs of the programme. As you can probably appreciate, the programme for a scheme of this nature isn't simple. There are some important dependencies, and in order to release the funding, there are 3 key requirements. We have to have planning approval, we have to have an approved final business case, and we have to have all the land that we need for the scheme in order to release the funding. So the key point I wanted to make around that was that the programme is complex, and not achieving the milestones, in this case making a CPO, if one is needed, delays will occur and the scheme costs will rise. Members should note that if negotiations for land purchase turn out to be unsuccessful, we will bring a separate report back to executive explaining this and asking for an order to be made for onward submission to the Secretary of State. Finally, the sort of indicative timescale about the things I've been talking about, assuming an order needs to be made, would be as follows. So following this meeting, we would attempt to purchase land by private agreement and in parallel draft the compulsory purchase order, and that sort of time period is from now until November, a roughly 9-month period. If a CPO is required, we would then bring a report back to December executive requesting that an order be made. If that went through okay, we would then submit the made order to the Secretary of State in early 2022. That would then set off a chain of events to confirm the order, and we can't be certain how long that will take, but on average it could be in the order of a further 6 to 12 months into 2022. So that completes my summary of the report, and if I can just turn to the participants' questions. We note all the comments, and alongside the review of all the consultation comments, we're considering potential changes to the designs to address the points raised. as I said, a further report will be presented to the executive in 2 or 3 months' time, which responds to that consultation. Councillor Fitzpatrick was talking about the amount of land. We haven't identified finally the amount of land to be subject to a CPO because we haven't got a detailed design and we haven't got planning approval. So there is another stage further down the line before that is confirmed. Mrs. Markey raised a number of issues around the Clifton Gate Business Park, and we have met on numerous occasions and had various correspondence. So we're trying to work constructively with Mrs. Markey, and I'm sure that will continue. And as I say, that will be picked up in this forthcoming report. Any questions?
Thank you very much to James and Gary for the introduction, and I'll open it up, as said, for any questions and comments. First go to Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief as we have a long agenda. I think Gary has covered most of the points across the report. I think it's probably apt in this current period with consultations that are going on to be faced with an issue of what actually happens when you have disinterested, distant Conservative councillors in charge of what happens in York. There was the opportunity to have a functioning ring road, but those somewhat north of the border in North Yorkshire did not see the benefit of that for York and chose to put that as a single road, something we've had to live with for a very, very long time. I'm very pleased to see the progress continuing on the York Outer Ring Road. As was alluded to by Gary, our priorities this year are to submit the planning, to acquire as much land as we can by private agreement, and to develop our detailed design and business case. There have been a lot of commentators, and the speakers will particularly welcome, and that's the level of engagement we're getting from the public, having had that very successful consultation under difficult circumstances from September to November of last year. Over 3,500 comments, and it's good that we've got that number of comments and about nearly 80% of people in support of the proposal. Obviously, concerns have been raised about, particularly around cycling and walking routes, and those are things we're progressing and not necessarily matters for this particular report. The report here is just asking us to approve the principles, as we have done previously, of the compulsory purchase order. It's not something, as was alluded to, that we will seek to do, but it's something that takes a particularly long time to progress. And it's important we take the first step now that allows us to go through and make that one happen. So I think, again, alluding to some of the comments such as Councillor Fitzpatrick about not locking things in, we're not doing that. We're not agreeing what particular land that we will allocate. It's just putting the process in place so that when we get to that point down the line, we have all the necessary levers and tools that we need to do that. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to support the recommendations on paragraph 9 at page 269.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gorne.
As noted in paragraph 30, this is a significant project which successive council administrations have worked towards achieving, as Councillor Ayres just referred to. External funding has been secured, which totals £58 million, including £25 million from Department for Transport, phase 1 of dualling, that's between the A19 and Little Hopgrove junctions, with £33 million from West Yorkshire, plus Transport Fund and Leeds City Region growth deal for the increased capacity on the roundabouts. We are listening to representations that have been made in the recent consultation that's been referred to, and certainly welcome the views of public speakers tonight that will be taken into account and considered carefully by officers and the administration. It's important to underline that whilst we hope that we won't have to use compulsory purchase powers, as you've heard from Gary Frost, the council does have to consider all options to minimise costly delays to such an important project. This proposed project does also provide a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to address concerns that have been raised by speakers around active and sustainable travel and safety on this busy road. So, for example, communities such as Haxby and Earswick and Huntington could be linked by a new walking and cycling east-west route parallel to the ring road, opening up the opportunities for walking or cycling to Clifton Moor or in reverse direction from from Rawcliffe to Monk's Cross. Sustainable travel will be an important element of the scheme, with options currently being looked at to further enhance pedestrian safety and crossings at the same time as ensuring good accessibility for essential motorised journeys. So it will be complemented by work with residents and businesses in this coming year on our 10-year recovery plan and the new local transport plan, contributing to our efforts to build back better and ultimately progress the city's ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. So I look forward to the report that's been referred to in the coming months on the public consultation and the modifications which officers are working through at the moment. I would like to thank everyone who's engaged in that consultation, because it will help us to shape the proposal in coming months so that we can ensure we can secure significant benefits for everyone and not just those who are driving cars along the ring road. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So with that, we've got the recommendations that have been outlined for agenda item 10. Could I please see all those in favour? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. And thank you very much, everybody. That then takes us on to agenda item 11, which is the Joint Waste Management Agreement, and that starts on page 283. And over to James to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. So North Yorkshire County Council and City of York are both waste disposal authorities. The council already has a joint waste management agreement with North Yorkshire Council for the management of the Allerton Park facility. That's because we both send our residual waste to the facility to have recyclates removed, and the anaerobic digester and energy from waste plant create electricity on the back of that. Both authorities also own Your Waste, which deliver a number of services for both authorities, but we currently manage those self-same services separately. So what this report seeks to do is to make best use and efficient use of council resources and taxpayers' money across North Yorkshire as a whole. The report proposes a shared waste management agreement which will incorporate the current joint waste management agreement for the management of Allerton Park, and it seeks to enable one set of processes in terms of contractor management of Your Waste. So that stops us both paying invoices and having client meetings and streamlines the management. The cost of the service shows an increase in payment to North Yorkshire, but this includes the management of the Your Waste contract and will release some resource in York to focus on service delivery. The additional payment to North Yorkshire is also partly due to paying our fair share of the joint waste management agreement now that's come to fruition. The final point I'd like to make is I would stress that this does not change our current level of control of the service residents receive. So as you will all know, we changed the opening hours this month of the Household Waste Recycling Centre in response to that additional demand. That you will still have exactly that same ability to specify what happens to services in the future. It doesn't change that. So you're asked to agree to the principle and delegate to me and the Director of Governance the final details and authority to enter into the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Councillor Widdowson.
Many thanks. In response to one of the public speakers, I would just like to confirm that it was Labour in 2014 who committed the council to the AMI contract, which includes operating Allerton Park for the next 25 years, and Labour who committed us to the service level agreement. Again, in response, I would love to have York produce zero waste except for that which can be recycled. This is unlikely to happen anytime soon, so I'm really pleased that we've moved away from landfill. Allerton Park serves a good function for York, ensuring all organic material is removed and fed into the anaerobic digester. The rest of the waste is then sorted, with all the recyclable material removed before entering the incinerator. So all the glass, metals, recyclable plastics and organic materials removed along the 1 mile of conveyor belts. Now back to the paper in hand. Opportunities to work efficiently and streamline management are to be welcomed. I am also pleased to see that officers have preserved the authority's ability to retain control of the service. So with that said, I'm happy to support the recommendations set out in this report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just have to respond, obviously. I thought it was a little bit of a strange intervention, but I guess I'll respond by asking an officer to confirm that that contract can be renegotiated if there are different priorities that the executive sees. That is an option to the council.
Thank you very much. I assume Councillor Widdowson was referring to Councillor Kilbane's comments at the start of the meeting, and I think Councillor Alexander was the council leader at that time. But Neil, I can see that you've popped up. Hopefully, I don't know whether you wanted to answer and then go to James. Neil,
I can if that's okay, Councillor Aston. The contract with Amy Sesper involved them in making investments of hundreds of millions of pounds into that new plant. And that investment of hundreds of millions of pounds effectively relied on the authority making a commitment for 27 years and delivering waste, and indeed that is based on the performance of that plant. So therefore, yes, any contract between two parties can be renegotiated, but the costs of renegotiation will be considerable, because we, at the time back in 2014, when we entered into this contract, agreed that Amy Sesper would make hundreds of millions of pounds of investment in a plant to deliver the output at that time that we wanted. And therefore, to change our mind, effectively only 5 years into the delivery of that contract, would have significant financial costs to Amy Sesper, and they will seek to pass those back on to the authority. So whilst it's possible, it would be very, very expensive.
thank you. James, was that hand? Yeah. James.
Yes, it was. I think just to separate the two issues, I think one of which is the Amy Sesper, which isn't the subject of this report, as Neil's alluded to. That is already agreed. In terms of this, the sort of contract that's before you, as I've alluded to, the services that are subject to this contract, absolutely you still have control of those as an executive. And yes, we could still talk to North Yorkshire about it, but Neil is absolutely right. The Amy Sesper contract is different and the services through that are different.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gorn.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything on this item, but I thought, given that Councillor Kilbane obviously was perhaps not been on the council as long as some of us, who will recall the arguments that the Greens put up against the incinerator when the Labour administration actually put forward the proposals when signed on the dotted line for a 27-year contract, which we said would at the time was going to be hostage to fortune, with changes in packaging and the drive to reduce the amount of waste that we're going to have in the coming years. I mean, Councillor Waller obviously has not been able to be here in this discussion, but I'm sure if he was, he would want to point out the significant effort that he put into ensuring that we had an anaerobic digester as part of that process to reduce the impact on the environment of that waste that we send to Allerton Park.
Thank you very much. It's always when debates like that remind some of us that we've been here for quite a while, but there we go. So thank you very much for those comments and questions. So that takes us to the recommendation on agenda item 11. Could I please see all those in favour? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting the recommendations. Thank you for that. I've also been checking time. My intention at this stage is just to carry on through and to finish the executive meeting. But if we do get to 7:30 and any councillors or officers or group wanted to take a break at that stage, please do indicate and I'll bring you in at that stage. If not, we'll carry on through the items. So next item is agenda item 12. Consultation on additional licensing scheme for houses in multiple occupation, starts at page 323. I'm going to hand over to Michael to introduce this to us.
Good evening. So this report directly responds to the council plan in looking to investigate the case for extending the licensing of houses in multiple occupation to also include smaller properties. Evidence highlights that a poor quality home can exacerbate a number of mental and physical health conditions, and at their worst, our homes can present a danger to our health and safety. At present, in York, only houses in multiple occupation with 5 or more occupants require a licence. This report provides evidence that this licensing regime has raised standards, improving the management of HMOs by reducing health and safety risks, ensuring occupants have access to adequate facilities, and improving the energy performance of these homes. However, this still leaves around 2,000 HMOs in the city, which contain 3 or 4 occupants, which are not subject to this same licensing regime. Within these homes, evidence suggests that the occupants are living in some of the poorest quality housing in the city. The report before you this evening includes 5 options for how we might improve the standards of these HMOs. We believe that the most effective solution is to utilise our powers under the Licensing Act, and as such, it is recommended that we undertake the required 10-week consultation with residents, landlords, and other interested parties. Following this consultation, the findings will be brought before Executive later in the year to determine whether smaller HMOs should require a licence, with the ambition of improving the housing conditions for thousands of residents who live in these properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I can see that Ruth has joined us at 2. Ruth, was there anything you wanted to add, or is that for questions?
I'm here for questions.
Great, thank you very much. So I'll first go to Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was just going to make some comments, really. This paper, as you heard, has been through scrutiny, and we've had a lot of questions about it from my perspective anyway. So I would like to welcome the supportive comments from the speakers, from Councillor Fenton and indeed from Councillor Pavlovic earlier on. I think this is a proposal that is something that more or less everyone would agree is a very positive thing to do. And that should include all good landlords who would, I hope, regard the improvement of standards across this key part of the private rented sector in York as a really good thing. If implemented, this will help landlords to better manage their properties. It will improve relationships with local residents and provide a level playing field for the sector. At this point, of course, as Michael has just said, the decision is to proceed with the 10-week statutory consultation on the proposal and to extend the HMO licensing to more properties, as officers have described. And the results of that consultation will come back to Executive for further decision. I do believe that the evidence base that we have is very strong for us to do this. Despite the fact there are some good landlords, we also have documented significant numbers of HMOs where people are living in seriously bad conditions, with inadequate room sizes, no access to natural light, very inadequate heating, and lack of maintenance and attention to health and safety. We also know that the mandatory licensing of HMOs with 5 occupants or more that came in 2018 has already allowed us to make significant improvements to standards in that part of the sector. So we know that licensing works. And we also know that a number of voluntary schemes have been tried in York over the years and haven't worked. And at that point, I'd just like to pick up quickly on the point that Councillor Pavlovic was making, that it's taken some time to get to this stage. I think he really indicated himself that a large part of the reason for that is that there is a requirement under the legislation to demonstrate a strong evidence base before we move to this point. And part of that is to show that we have tried voluntary schemes and they have failed and haven't had the desired impact. So I think we have all the evidence there, and basically taking this forward will benefit tenants through much better housing conditions. It'll benefit nearby residents through better maintained and managed properties, and also benefit landlords through clearer expectations and more training and support for the management of properties. So on that basis, I'd really like to thank Ruth and her team for the very significant amount of work that you can see has gone into this, and commend the paper for your approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craighill. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I think I will end up just repeating what others have already said, but I'll try and do it really briefly. I want to pay tribute to Councillor Pavlovic for his determination on this policy and to effect this change. As a party, we fully support the additional licensing of houses in multiple occupation, as has been alluded to. It's something we've been calling for a long period, because everybody deserves to live in a safe, comfortable home, and too many HMOs until now have failed to reach those basic standards, as is highlighted in the report. Despite Article 4 planning policies, we strongly support the policies to control the spatial distribution of HMOs, but there have been long repeated concerns from residents about the planning system allowing more HMOs in a street or within a community because it's got an under-registered number of actual HMOs. And so through this policy and these recommendations, action to mandatorily license houses in multiple occupation is really welcomed to support further and wider planning policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I cannot see any further indications to speak. So we've got the recommendations that have been suggested to us on agenda item 12. Could I please see those in favour? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you. That then takes us on to agenda item 13, which is the community asset transfer update, and that starts at page 389. And I'm going to hand over to Tracy to introduce the paper to us first.
Thank you very much, Chair. City of York Council has a long and very successful history of using its land and its property to provide services to and support the activities of our communities. And this includes a long list of successful community asset transfers over the last 20 to 30 years. In November 1920, that's 100 years ago, in November 2020, Executive agreed the corporate asset strategy that reiterated this commitment to support the community control of assets that deliver strong and sustainable community outcomes. This report now sets out proposals to transfer 10 council assets or pieces of land to local community groups for their use to deliver services to their communities. And these spaces are quite diverse. They include natural habitat and nature reserves, ponds, pavilions, park lodges, allotments, tennis courts and community centres. And it's an extensive report, and it's getting late in the evening, so I won't go through every single one of them, but there is lots of detail in this report. Some of these proposals are the results of many years of community endeavour and some pretty complex, detailed property work, which has now been brought to a conclusion in this report. In response to the comments of some of the earlier public speakers, with regard to the rough allotment proposal, Mr. Rawlings made some inquiries about the timely delivery of the activity on the Rufford allotment, given that it has been an idea in everybody's mind for some years now. Although there is some fairly detailed work on both planning and procurement to be able to put in place the services prior to the handover of the lease, we have now got a kind of a timetable for that delivery, which would see a handover of the allotment in around November, so that we don't face another blighted planting season for the allotment holders. And in regard to his concerns about the reference in the report to a further report, that report was relating to the broader proposal for new woodland in the adjoining area and the use of the Ridge and Furrow land adjoining the allotment space. In regard to the Roundtree Lodge speaker, the council confirms its commitment to commit the capital budget to undertake the repairs to the core residual issues that we've got around asbestos in the property, whilst the Friends of Roundtree Park undertake their further fundraising activities to bring back a further business plan. So I recommend the report to you, and we have Nick Collins online as well if you've got any detailed queries about any of the individual proposals.
Thank you both very much. So I'll open the report to colleagues for any questions or comments. Go to Councillor Eyre first.
Chair, I think I probably just wanted to observe that we're lucky to have a number of community groups across the city and volunteers, some of which we heard from today, who help us to maintain assets on behalf of the residents in their community and the residents across the city. As Tracy alluded to, we've had a strong track record in the past of community asset transfers. A couple of ones I noticed in the report, the hut at Clarence Gardens, which has been a fantastic success, a great asset close to the hospital that wasn't being fully utilised and now really is, and Tanghall Community Centre close to where I live. The other side of this is it also opens up the opportunity for greater funding that is not necessarily available to the local authority. So the work the Roundtrees are doing, they'll be able to put bids into different organisations that councils wouldn't be able to get that particular funding for. This paper tidies up a great deal of these. I think they're always large papers when Nick, Tracy and I get together in terms of coming to executive, and we do apologise for some of the length of things that we come to. So I suppose with that one, I'm happy to support the recommendations on paragraph 6. And as with most of mine and Nick's recommendations, they do take 2 pages, from pages 390 to page 391.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Eyre. Obviously, open the item for any further questions. Just say it was not quite as long as the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan Examiner's report. If we were in a competition today, I can't see any further questions. So we've got the recommendations in front of us for agenda item 13. Can I please see those in favour of accepting them? So that's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you all very much. That then takes us on to agenda item 14. I haven't been told of any urgent business for the meeting tonight, and Janie has just confirmed that. So just to thank those watching at home, officers and councillors and public participants for attending the executive today. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.